Right. This is a bit of an unusual subject for a Sunday talk. In fact, I'm not sure. I can only remember one other occasion that anyone's ever spoken about. But I'll first tell you about how I came to do the talk. So this is something that's on my heart. On a personal note, within my wider family, that I do know of two individuals who've literally drunk themselves to death. There was no other explanation for their deaths. And one of these was one of the last people that I would have thought would do this. It was my elderly, sweet, lovely, one of my great aunts. I've got loads of them, so I'm not giving anything away by saying this. And this was very many years ago. She died in the late 60s. I was a child, didn't know anything about it. And then many years later, my great uncle, when he was very elderly, explained that she was a secret alcoholic and that she drank at home, and he couldn't stop her. There was nothing he could do. She just bought alcohol secretly and eventually died from just drinking too much. But nobody else knew about it except him. And there was another family member who people were aware he had a problem. So, the other part of my motivation comes from my job as a doctor, where I've tried to help people with addiction, and it's so difficult in the minimal amount that you can do. You know, so I've seen many other people die that could have been helped, but there was no way to help them. They didn't have enough help to be able to help themselves, if you see what I mean, or chose not to change. An addiction's a strange thing. If you've not read it already, if you read the last monthly manna that's been sent around the little notice sheet, Rob Hawksworth wrote a really good article about self-control in relation to a packet of chocolate hobnobs. And he said the only way that he could avoid eating too many chocolate hobnobs was just to not buy chocolate hobnobs. But if your addiction is alcohol, it's not just one sort of biscuit. You've got to avoid all alcohol forever, for the rest of your life, living in an environment where adverts are on for it, it's served everywhere you go. It's not a problem for the people. They can drink it, but you can't have it, and you can never have it. And that is sort of just a difficult thing to overcome. You've got to really, really want to change. But then by contrast, I'd go along to Grapevine, the Christian festival, when it was called Grapevine, and I'd see the people from Battelle, similar to Hope House, where Sarah works, and they were full of joy because they'd broken that addiction. They'd met Jesus. Their lives were completely transformed, and they were so happy. And it was such a big difference between the people that I couldn't help and these people who had been helped. So that's some of my motivation. So I thought another thing I thought about was that not just that the Battelle people, they'd met Jesus, everything was fine, but they needed support. So the churches that had people in from Battelle didn't have any alcohol as part of their social calendar at all. So they did other things to support people. And then at one of these occasions, I came here, and it seemed like every service I had, the person was saying about how wonderful it was to have fellowship with a bottle of wine around the table with your friends. And I thought, if I had just been out of Battelle and then I came here, this might be a tricky environment to be in. So that got me thinking about it. Anyway, I put in the circular thing that I sent about that there's 247 references in the Bible to alcohol. You'll be delighted to know we're not going to read them all. But Gwen and Peter are going to read some of them. These are from the Old Testament. So,
use the silver to buy whatever you like: cattle, sheep, wine, or other fermented drink, or anything you wish. Then you and your household shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God, and rejoice.
The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man or woman wants to make a special vow, a vow of dedication to the law as a Nazirite, they must abstain from wine and other fermented drink, and must not drink vinegar made from wine or other fermented drink.
He makes grass grow for the cattle and plants for people to cultivate, bringing forth food from the earth, wine that gladdens human hearts, oil to make faces shine.
Then the Lord said to Aaron, you and your sons are not to drink wine or other fermented drink. Wherever you go into the tent of meeting, or you will die. This is a lasting ordinance from the generations to come, so that you can distinguish between the holy and the common, between the unclean and the clean, and so you can teach the Israelites all the decrees the Lord has given them through Moses.
On this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats, and the finest of wine.
Woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine and champions of mixing drinks. Do not join with those who drink too much wine or gorge themselves on meat.
So that's clear then, isn't it? So those readings are from a mixture of chapters: Deuteronomy, Numbers, Psalms, Leviticus, Isaiah and Proverbs. And what they show, that it seems completely contradictory, but it's not. But there is a bit of a picture of emerging. One of these, God has given us alcoholic drinks to enjoy, especially in the context of celebration. But abusing it, and specifically drunkenness, is wrong. But in addition, I especially like the verse which is, woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine and a champion at mixing drinks, which is a fantastic phrase. But I think most people have been at a social gathering. You met one of those. Yeah. As the sort of person who's egging people on to drink more, oh, have another drink and another day, or sort of making a big virtue out of, you know, I've drunk more than anybody else. But there were some other verses. So the Levites, who normally didn't have to abstain from alcohol, were advised to do so when they were going to enter the Holy of Holies. They were sort of setting them aside for God at that point. And then there was also a group of Nazirites who were dedicated to God from birth, who weren't even able to eat a grape, never mind drink a glass of wine. So they had to be completely abstinent. So I've got 3 spot prizes to keep everybody awake. So the first spot prize is if anybody can name a famous Nazirite from the Bible. No. Samson, yeah, who said Samson? Yeah, you can have your prize later. No. As we move into the New Testament, you mentioned John the Baptist. There's echoes in the life of John the Baptist. He wasn't a Nazirite, but there's definitely echoes, and you'll hear that in the reading.
But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. He will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born. He will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God."
So although it doesn't spell it out, John the Baptist is almost the new Nazirite, if you like, when he comes. But then along comes Jesus. And his first miracle is to turn water into wine. If you want to read the story, review it, it's in John 2. But it's quite well known. So Jesus and his mum and the disciples, they go along to a wedding. Halfway through the wedding planner disaster, run out of wine. And encouraged by his mum, Jesus gets 6 massive stone jars, which were designed for washing with water. And he tells the servants to take them to the master of ceremonies. I guess the servants peered in them as they took them along. Anyway, the master of ceremonies tastes the wine, which is the water, now wine, is amazed and says to the bridegroom, most people serve the best wine at the beginning, serve the cheap plonk till the end, when everyone's had too much. You've done it the other way around. Here is the best wine. And then it says, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So John the Baptist, abstaining, dedicating himself to God. Jesus is God, coming along drinking. And this contrast between them, the two, was picked up by the religious leaders, like the Pharisees, who criticised both of them. Can I have our next slide? Oh, here we are, fantastic. For John came neither... So Jesus says this in response to the criticism he's been given. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say he's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And Jesus usually had a sort of witty retort to them when they make these criticisms. But on one occasion he says that the reason his disciples are eating and drinking with him and celebrating is because he's the bridegroom. He's referring forwards to the bride of Christ, and he's the bridegroom of the bride of Christ. And so, but again, he doesn't really explain why, but yeah, there's the contrast again between the two extremes. Moving on to the time of the early church, Peter's going to do a reading from 1 Timothy, and Paul here is writing to Timothy, and he's concerned that the leaders in the church set a good example.
Now the overseer is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. In the same way, deacons are to be worthy of respect, sincere, not indulging in much wine, and not pursuing dishonest gain.
So he's writing then about people in charge. You've got an additional responsibility to set a good example. And like in the Old Testament, there's also references in avoiding drunkenness. So Peter writes, for you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, etc., etc. So the time for that is past and we're moving on. But at one point, Timothy is obviously not drinking any alcohol at all, because Paul writes to him and says, stop drinking only water and use a little wine because of your stomach and your frequent illnesses. And it might have been that Timothy had indigestion, or it might be a reflection that there was a recognition that water wasn't always the healthiest thing to drink because you just got it out of a well. So, you know, even though people didn't understand why, they might not have always thought that water was very safe. And that kind of carried on. So the church, as it went on, reflected wider society, which was that unless it was fresh from a spring, water wasn't always safe, so it was safer to drink alcohol. And pretty much everybody drank all alcohol all the time. Judy, if you could put up the photograph. In fact, it was, at some points, it was actually considered a bit suspicious if you didn't drink alcohol. This is from Haddon Hall. This is probably legend, it might not even be true, but it's supposedly the shackle on the door was when they were having a big banquet in the banqueting hall. If anyone wasn't drinking, they were worried that they were a spy because they weren't drunk, so they might be listening to everything and writing it down, so they'd just stick them in there. And yeah. So if you didn't drink enough at the banquet, that's where you ended up. So, and even people like the Puritans, that we think of the Puritans as abstaining, but actually they took a good supply of alcohol with them on the Mayflower. So they just, but again, they said biblical principles, not drinking to drunkenness or doing bad things, but they in no way abstained. And the same thing in the English Civil War, the Roundheads still drank like the Cavaliers did, but they just tended to have beer and again, they promoted not getting drunk. So it's only really in the 19th century that there was a sort of Christian temperance movement towards not drinking at all. And this came out of fears for social ills because because there was so much poverty and so much misery associated, particularly with people they'd earn money, they'd spend it, the families would be in poverty, sort of just terrible social situations. So I've modified Ephesians 5 verse 23 to say, do not get drunk on any alcohol, which leads to debauchery, but also domestic violence, unwanted pregnancy, life-changing accidents and suicide, which are all things that happened then, and they're all things that happen now that I've seen, directly of people who hadn't intended to have the consequences. Yeah. And another factor at that point might have been safety concerns, because increasing number of jobs were in factories involving machinery, and they were worried about things people getting hurt or hurting other people. Helen and Bod have to go anyway. They're not walking out because of what I've said. They might be walking out because of what I've said. Okay, next spot prize. So famous among these temperance reformers who promoted not drinking at all were 3 famous families. First prize, spot prize for anyone who can name all 3 families. There's a clue. Yep.
Fry, Roundtree and Cadbury.
Yeah, Ruth and Cadbury. You'll have to share them later. So Salvation Army temperance movement, it started 1864, and they had temperance fountains, which were clear drinking water, so it was safe to drink water. And some of these still around, they're quite beautiful. Right, now the medical bit, Judy, for next. I'll try and keep the medical bit minimal. I could talk for hours on this, but I'll try not to. Can anybody see that? So that's somebody filling in their alcohol questionnaire at the doctor's. I can never remember, does one reduce it by 1/3 or 1/2 on the form? So, yeah. So, the only biblical reference for this is from Corinthians, where Paul writes, Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, who you have received from God? You are not your own. So in the UK at the moment, about 20% are teetotal anyway and don't drink anyway. And that's for a mixture of reasons, belief, health, just being intolerant of alcohol. But 1 to 2% do have severe alcohol dependency. And some of those are known and some of them aren't. Well, actually, a fraction of them are known and receiving help. 24% of the population drink above advised current health limits, and a significant number will have some sort of alcohol-related problem. It might be mental health, physical health, or behavioural issues, which they may or may not be aware of and may or may not be wanting to address. In the past, it was commonly said that alcohol intake was a J-shaped curve. In other words, drinking some alcohol was good, drinking no alcohol was bad, and drinking a lot of alcohol was bad. So it was better to drink a bit. I think that's largely, in health terms, been discredited because alcohol's now been identified as cancer-causing, and even the sort of the upper limit of advised limits has slight increases in heart cardiovascular disease, but it's minimal. So the government has set the 14. Their current guidelines of 14 units of alcohol a week should be people's limits, and that gives you a 1% chance of having an alcohol-related disease. So they've not set it at 0 chance. They've set it at 1%, because 1% is not very much. And we take risks every day. We do, everything we do. We ride a bicycle, we go in the car, we climb a mountain, and it's balancing how much enjoyment you get from something against the risk of it. We do those balancing acts all the time. So current advisable units, 14 units, spread over at least 3 days and avoiding more than 5 units on any occasion. And so some people who like to have a couple of alcohol-free days because it helps them keep that balance. So, next cartoon, that's okay. So you're saying, I never have more than 1 glass. So sometimes it's difficult to decide how many units of alcohol are in a glass. So that's one of my nicer red glasses of wine with some wine in it. So next spot prize, how many units of alcohol are there in that glass of wine? 4, says Judy. 2? 3.5. 3.5, yes. Janet gets 3. So it's 3.5 because this is benign-looking cheap Penguin Sands, but it doesn't have to be cheap Penguin Sands. It could be posh French wine. The range of percentages of alcohol is very variable. So even the weakest ones, that's 250 mils. So 1 unit is a small glass, but even 12% of wine, it's more than a unit, is a small glass of red wine. So by the time you get to that size glass and 14% wine, that's 3.5 units of alcohol. So it's very easy to drink 14 units of alcohol. So the only real way you can tell how many units there are is read the back of the bottle. That's the only. Or a can, because often a can of beer, you think, oh, it's a small can of beer, that's 1 unit. Almost certainly it isn't. It's usually more than that. So, okay. Next one, Judy. So these are a few alcohol-related diseases. The only one I really want to mention on there is fatty liver, which is getting extremely common. And 10% of people with fatty liver disease go on to develop cirrhosis of the liver. 10% of them will develop cancer of the liver, primary cancer of the liver, not liver that's spread to it. And that when I first started working, that was rare. by the time I left, it was common. So because, and a lot of that is to do with the percentage of alcohol that's in things being higher. The only other medical thing I want to mention is mental health. And that's because people commonly use alcohol as a sort of self-treatment for anxiety and depression. But that is not always a very good idea. So, well, a bit of alcohol to take the edge off your nerves is unlikely to make a major problem, a major difference. Using alcohol more to combat your mental health problem is likely to make the issue far worse. So with anxiety, a drink relieves your anxiety, but then later on your anxiety comes back and probably worse than it was before. So then you get into a vicious cycle of drinking more and more to combat the anxiety, making the anxiety worse as you go on. And with depression, some people know that if they drink an alcoholic drink, it makes them depressed. And the ideal thing is to just not do it. That just happens. But what's more commonly is they feel better when they've had a drink, and then it perpetuates the depression, so then they feel worse afterwards. And this can happen, particularly people who are drinking 6 units a day or more, that simply, if they stop drinking alcohol, they don't have depression. I've seen that on quite a few occasions. If somebody drinking that much can actually stop completely, suddenly they're all right. Because they've started at a low ebb drinking and it just keeps going. So, and also higher levels drinking stop antidepressants being effective. So. Okay, but that's not really what I wanted to focus on, scaring you with medical facts. Jesus lived at a time when this knowledge that's current wasn't known. And his focus wasn't to be a health guru. He was there for spiritual enlightenment and for revealing the fact that he was the Messiah. So, next cartoon, Judy. The message isn't to become too dogmatic about what you're doing. Like this man who's drinking his following day's alcohol allowance and he's up to 2034 already. So my conclusions are, God's not against us drinking alcohol. He seems to positively promote it in terms of celebration. But drunkenness or encouraging others to drink to excess is wrong. There's no fixed rules about what anybody chooses to drink. That's entirely up to them. But some individuals and some groups are encouraged to abstain, and that's associated with a deeper dedication to God. But really, the reason why I put this in an Equipping Sunday and what I wanted to say was to do with how we help people with these issues and how we become how do you get your balance right between your personal freedom, enjoying what God's given us, and helping people that are struggling. And so, on your tables, there's some Bible verses to have a look at. So this is just for 5 minutes. I'm going to walk round and give each table a scenario, which you can either just mull over yourself or chat on your table. Okay, if you'd like to bring your discussions to a close. Has anybody got anything that they'd like to feedback, something that's come up on their table? If you do so, sort of, that's particularly relevant. Shall I say what the scenarios are, and then is that any help? So one is, your cousin is a recovering alcoholic and has expressed some interest in finding out about your faith. He moves to your area, or he or she moves to your area. Are there any things about our services or our church that you would be concerned about? What could you do? Anybody got any ideas on this? There's no right or wrong answers. It's not a...
Well, communion is quite hard. I mean, we had a friend who was a severe alcoholic and he was with AA and it was really helping him a lot. But he used to come up to the communion and he used to say, I wanted to grab that cup and knock it back. So he found it really hard.
Yeah.
I know we normally eat that grape juice as well.
Mm-hmm. Or blackcurrant, yeah.
But, you know, if you don't know what's going on with them,
Yeah, I think that's one that's worth doing. One is that there needs to be plenty of non-alcoholic option, that it should be there automatically and that people shouldn't have to ask for it. And the other thing is it is probably better having the little tiny glasses, at least, yeah. It's easier than the cup. And the other thing is talking to people. So if somebody like that, like Judy's friends there, is to talk to them about it. What can you cope with? What can you not cope with? What do we need to do to make this easier for you? And that often is the case with almost everything, that people will have different options. But it might be that if we knew that was a problem for somebody, you wouldn't put the wine bottle out. You wouldn't do that. You'd just have the little cups out and you'd make it clear it was non-alcoholic. And maybe you would even choose, should you move to non-alcoholic wine for communion if it was an issue? There isn't a right or a wrong answer. They're just things to think about. Anything else? Anybody?
We're saying as well, when you invite somebody to your house, there needs to be always that awareness, whether you know or not whether somebody's a recovering alcoholic, just to always have other options.
Yes.
Never just presume that everybody's happy to drink alcohol.
Yeah, so I think it's helpful to have the sentence, would you like a list, not would you like a wine, and if they look hesitant then offer them something else. Sort of always give an option. Yeah. Anything else on there's one that's the belonging group one. Sorry. Yeah.
It's your attitude as well to each situation. I don't drink because I get migraine.
Yeah.
I used to drink. Kind of accepted migraine when they got too bad. But going out with a group of people and just having a soft drink can sometimes be very hard. So I'll just have one, and people would buy me a drink even though I said I don't want alcohol.
Yes.
And I would just leave it on the table. So it's all our attitudes to drink as well. That people don't have to drink if they don't want to.
Yeah, exactly. And that is, it's sort of, I had that happen to me the other day because I said I'll just have one sip of the wine because I know I can have one sip without having a migraine. I can drink other alcoholic drinks, but I can't drink wine. And so the person that I was with, who I don't know really well, couldn't accept that I literally wanted one sip. They thought I must want a small glass, but so they couldn't just not give it me. They had to give me a small glass. I don't want to small. I literally just wanted to taste it to see what it tasted like. So it's those sort of presumptions about what people want. Yeah. Any other? There was also the person who's got anxiety. Anybody got the anxiety one and want to feed anything back on that?
We were talking about sort of trying to get to the root
Yeah.
of what the issue was.
Yes.
And, it may be that if somebody is a Christian, then what you will say and how you'll talk will be different to a non-Christian. Might also point to the doctor as well.
Yeah.
I was saying that it doesn't say how much vodka she drinks, but like doctors and told them that she's got severe social anxiety, they probably prescribe some sort of anti-anxiety medication. If she's having a shot of vodka before she goes out and that's all she needs, that'll have less effect than anxiety medications. So
Yeah.
maybe I'm cynical, I don't know, but I'm not saying she should have to drink alcohol to go out of the house, obviously that's horrific, but if she went through severe social anxiety and all it was taking was this shot of vodka, weaning her off that shot of vodka might be easier than my experience of people who have anxiety is often some doctors' responses, right, we'll put you on some medication to deal with it.
Yeah, and that can be a problem that we always should be aware of. Doctors should always be aware of people's alcohol intakes in terms of prescribing. But but when you have long conversations with people, it's easy to get to the end of it and you suddenly realise you've not asked, you've no idea. And actually that may be a major issue and you haven't dealt with it, you haven't dealt with it properly. And as Emma says, that actually might seem for that person, they may be able to function completely well doing that. And so in order to decide it's not a good thing and it's not the right thing for them, they've got to have they've got to be able to sort the issue out. If you don't help them with the underlying issue, they're not going to be able to stop drinking the vodka because they need a solution to the problem. People will only do what's going to benefit them. And what we think and what looking outside in you might think is better for somebody isn't always better for them. You've got to, it's knowing what's better. But there are plenty of sources of help. Can you have the sources of help slide, please, Judy? So I put Oaks because we've not got any particular group for people with addiction problems at the moment, although Karen's got some experience from the past, haven't you? You're not doing that group at the moment, though? Yeah. And obviously Sarah's got experience working in Hope House. People with past medical experience will have got some sort of idea. So there are people that you can talk to if you're trying to help somebody or you don't know what to do. Send people to their GP, encourage them to be really honest about what the situation is. It's really difficult to help somebody if you don't know what the situation is. Derbyshire Recovery Partnership is the main specific alcohol service in the area. I'll put the website up. Alcoholics Anonymous is, if you look on, they don't advertise their meetings as Alcoholics Anonymous. They're advertised with some amazing ones. One sounded like a really good folk event to go to, but it's actually Alcoholics Anonymous, but they just call it something else. So, but if you go on the website and look at Alcoholics Anonymous, it will tell you where the different groups are. Battelle is a fantastic Christian charity which will help people with severe alcohol problems. Like Hope House, they go to live in a centre, and so there's no alcohol available to them. They've got Christian input, prayer, work, lots of things to occupy them while they deal with the addiction. But not everybody wants to go into an environment where they're going to have to start the day with a prayer meeting and a Bible study. So they've got to really want to change, or they've got to want to met Jesus and want to know Jesus more, and that can be the motivating factor for them.
I presume like Battelle and Hope House, therefore that have got to the very extreme sort of...
Yes, they're the extremes.
Prevention is better than cure, isn't it? So it's that journey on the way to getting more an alcoholic that we can really try.
Yes, in terms of helping, we can help people who are yeah, like you say, heading that way, but not there, yes. Or that, you know, somebody there's plenty of people getting mood problems, you know. So there's lots of us with, you know, lots of issues that, you know, this might be relevant to in some way, shape or form. Jude, if you just want to put the last slide, which I think these are the two take-home messages. Take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. And so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. So, if you can stick with those, then you can't go far wrong. Anybody got any questions? Yeah.
I don't know if you can help understand this. You talked about mental health and anxiety, people on a journey who will take a bit of alcohol but then feel worse and more depression.
Yeah.
Is that the way that people become alcoholic ultimately, or is alcoholism a separate thing in itself?
Yeah, yes and no.
Sorry?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, most people like Patella who have been alcoholic can only stay okay if they completely abstain. Now, is there a situation where people do recover from alcoholism and then can have a normal amount of drink and be okay? I'm not aware of that. So
there's
what's happened in the human brain
yeah.
that means that once you've gone that far, you're never going to be able to cope with anything?
I think there's some people who are both genetically and maybe also socially but particularly genetically so predisposed to alcoholism that the only solution is complete abstinence.
They don't, I mean, although genetics there, but they probably didn't start drinking until they were 13 or 14, or was it 50 or 60? You know, when did that start?
Yeah, there's another big group where you can develop alcohol dependence. So there are some people who can stop and then drink sensibly, who have become alcohol dependent and managed to not be alcohol dependent and can choose to drink a small amount. They usually have to be quite strict with that, but yes, they can do it. Or they know that if they go in a social situation where there's other people with them, they're okay to have one glass of wine with a meal, but they wouldn't drink at all at home because they know that would be a slippery slope for them. So not everybody who's been alcohol dependent has to completely abstain for the rest of their life, but a lot of people, particularly if they've got a strong genetic disposition, do need to abstain. So it's not, there's no absolute, and you know, and some people can just learn there are different techniques which won't go into now because it'll take too long, but in which you can reduce your alcohol intake gradually, and some people are able to do that. So it depends a lot on the individual and the circumstances they live in, because some people's alcoholism is strongly driven by their social circumstances, and if they can be in an entirely different social situation, or underlying hurts can be healed, or underlying issues can be dealt with, they then can manage alcohol normally. So there's no definites or absolutes.
Could you just clarify, when, you know, if you've got friends who maybe start drinking more than you think is healthy for them, at what point, is it just the 14 units that you'd say that's when your alarm bells start ringing in terms of helping people, or are there other things that you would say are the alarm bells we should be more aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say there's plenty of people who drink more than 14 units and they've just chosen to drink more than 14 units and they haven't got an alcohol problem. It might be causing them a problem, but it's like just a choice thing. Yeah. But it increases the chances of them getting health problems as time goes on. Yeah. But obviously, not everybody who drinks 30 units gets an alcohol-related disease. It's just a much higher likelihood than if you drink 14 units. So, again, it's not absolutes or definites. It's just risk. It's just the risk goes up with the more you drink. I think and it's whether people have chosen to do that. So they can choose it because they don't know. So there's plenty of people have that every day because they think a glass of red wine is healthy for them. So a glass like that of red wine every day isn't healthy for them. So sometimes it's just not knowing. Yeah. Sometimes, but there are people who struggle. So if you've got a friend and you're going to something and there isn't going to be any alcohol there, and that seems to worry them, or they feel the need to have their own drink, or you can tell that every time you go out with them, they've had a drink before you meet them, like, what do you call it, when you pre-drink before you go out. Yeah, preloading. Or whenever anything bad happens to them, they drink excessively. Or their behaviour, when they've had so much, they start being aggressive to people, they start being irritable. Or you notice that they become very depressed when they've had a drink. So it's when you start, so it's either that it's affecting the behaviour adversely or just something else you're worried about, like you would worry, like if somebody said, I'm going out, I never put my seatbelt on in the car, you probably say, well, is that really a good idea? And, and again, people, it's choice, and it's that balance between people choosing to make bad choices and allowing them to do that, and not being nagging and miserable about it and destroying your relationship, against caring for them as a person. And there's no line that you can say that's your line. You've just got to ask God, pray, be sensitive, maybe start to raise something and see what the response is. It's not an easy thing to decide. Okay. Should we leave it there? I'm sorry, one more question.
Moving on from that, so if you've got friends that you're observing that are drinking more than maybe we would consider appropriate or healthy, let's say, other than their drinking habit, I mean, you've mentioned the peripheral neuropathy and the cardiac problems and that. What sort of things would we see? If someone is developing an alcohol-related disease, if they are becoming unhealthy because of their alcohol, what would you see if someone had a liver problem? What would you see if someone had all the things that you've got up there? What might that look like?
Well, you wouldn't necessarily see anything. Yeah, and the problem is that you may not necessarily see anything until they've got advanced cirrhosis. And also, you can have normal liver function tests and have cirrhosis of the liver. So you can have a blood test for your liver, and it's normal, and you think, my liver's fantastic. No, it's not necessarily fantastic.
So how would you encourage someone who's quite maybe unaware and a little resistant? Because I think most people would probably be quite, if they enjoy alcohol, they're going to be quite resistant to you suggesting, well, maybe that's not healthy. How would you, if they just go to the doctors and get a normal blood test, and that doesn't help them, how would you enable them to see the impact of the alcohol-related diseases that you've mentioned? What might?
I mean, the high blood, heart attacks, obvious. The peripheral neuropathy would be numbness in your fingers and toes, but there's 100 different reasons why you might have that. So all those things, apart from fetal alcohol syndrome, can be caused by lots of other things. So not everybody, most people with these conditions, or a lot of, apart from most of those conditions, can be caused by other things. So you can't. It's if somebody develops a disease like those, you have to consider whether alcohol is one of the causes of it.
So if they weren't being honest with their GP about their alcohol intake, and went to the doctor with some of those, the neuropathy, or they're getting lots of colds, or they feel like the heart, the heart's not beating properly or whatever, would it not automatically do more?
With all those issues, you'd ask about alcohol and consider it, but if the person lies to you, nothing you can do. I mean, people drinking excessively, you can tell. Like, you'll all know, what somebody's like that. But you can easily be damaging yourself and it not be apparent to anybody, including your own doctor. Sorry, don't want to be depressing.
Things have changed. Many years ago, my grandfather was diabetic.
Yeah.
He told how short, small pot of whiskey every night in the blood. Is that still sort of the same sort of thing that happens, or do you need something else nowadays?
There's still people who follow those sort of guidelines. I mean, you usually made them up themselves, but it's sort of, yeah. And people can absolutely believe that, and they don't want to change it. Not everybody wants to change. That's fine. It's not fine for the health, but it's fine in terms of personal choice. If you're not harming anybody else, then, yeah.
One thing you didn't mention that shocked me was the amount of calories that are in alcohol.
Yeah.
So that could be another factor. And I know when my friends found out, it sort of reduced their amount of drinking because the amount of calories that are in.
Yes, yeah. But that again, look on the bottle for the amount of calories there is in whatever you're drinking. But again, it's a personal choice. You have to choose what you eat.
A lot of alcohol, they are exempt from telling you the calorie content. I tried for ages to find out one of the cans of fruit ciders, they're quite sweet, and I tried to find out whether calorifically they were worse than a glass of wine or what, and you can't find out. It's really horrendous that the drink industry has actually got the okay to not have to submit the nutritional information, because we'd all make different choices if we had that information, sure.
Yeah. Okay.